This is the fifth video in this series, and we come at last to the most controversial area of all, government. Let's approach this subject carefully. In case you missed any of the previous videos, you can find them by searching YouTube Anthony Ibbott. They build upon each other in the following order, so it's best if you view them in this order. The big question now is, how do you defend your own rights? How do you right a wrong that's already been committed? You have to use physical force. There's just no other way. And you either do it yourself, or you hire someone else to do it for you. Let's consider the period of Western American history from the end of the Civil War to about 1900. The revolver had been invented, and it was popular among ranchers to protect their herds from wolves and other predators. It was popular among the honest as well as the dishonest. This period, particularly the 1880s, is romantically referred to today as the Wild West. From Dodge City to San Francisco, horse thieving, cattle rustling, bank robberies, train robberies, stagecoach holdups, drunken saloon brawls, shootouts in the streets, common occurrences. Honest folks weren't safe anywhere. Something had to be done. Ranchers and town merchants often hired some of the gunfighters to protect them against other gunfighters. It wasn't always easy to know if a gunfighter was honest or dishonest. Some of them switched back and forth. What do? You get organized. You get a group of men together and you create an agency for the common defense. You need to protect individuals from each other, settle violent and non-violent disputes, and to protect them from outsiders. You need to ban the initiation of non-consensual physical force, and the only way to do that is to defend and retaliate with force. You need to govern a geographic area. You need to create a government. As I mentioned in the previous video, you're within your rights to tackle a thief and take back your wallet. That much is proper. But when you take his wallet too, that's excessive force, and it's a violation. It's improper. That's how you know how far you can go. That's where the boundary is. Anything you do beyond defense and retaliation is crossing the line. It doesn't matter if you're doing it for yourself or you hired yourself out to do it for someone else. So this government you create has only one tool: physical force. And it can use that tool only to do what the individual can properly do. It can use this tool of physical force in defense and retaliation, but nothing more. And why not? Because any government function that goes beyond the protection of individual rights means that physical force will be used to violate the rights of individuals, and that will be improper. Now, assuming you intend to create a proper government, the first question that comes up is, who says you can do that? Where does your authority come from? Don't you need to ask everyone? Don't you need the consent of the governed? And if you go around asking, you'll find that there are an awful lot of people to ask. Many of them are too young to know what you're talking about, and an infinite number of them haven't been born yet. This is one of my favorite questions. To answer it, we need to flip it over and look at it from the other side. This is a helpful logical technique. What would it mean to oppose the creation of a proper government? A man would have to declare that he doesn't want to have his rights protected. This means that he wants his rights left unprotected. He's essentially inviting people to violate his rights. Does this make any sense? Let's put it in plain English. He is saying, in my judgment, it is acceptable for others to force me to act against my judgment. I'll say that again. Such a man is essentially saying, in my judgment, it is acceptable for others to force me to act against my judgment. I know that's mind-boggling and it calls for an example. He's saying, just like everyone else, I don't want my property stolen or to be tortured and murdered, but I'm quite happy if others steal my property and torture and murder me. You might want to pause this video right now and think that over. I'm confident that you'll find that it's a contradiction, a meaningless utterance. It's equivalent to saying nothing at all. A person who opposes the creation of a proper government is uttering gibberish. He's a raving madman and can be ignored. So you don't need to ask anyone. You don't need anyone's consent. You won't be violating anyone's rights by doing it. In fact, you're doing it for your own survival. You have the inalienable right to create a proper government for your own protection. You can just go ahead and do it. Now, it does make sense for a man to say that he prefers to protect his own rights. That's reasonable. If he ever comes under attack, he can fight it out with the bad guy himself. But he must be careful. If he defends himself too zealously, meaning that he uses excessive force, he becomes a bad guy, and the government must subdue them both. Now let's be more specific about what a proper government can be empowered to do. It must settle non-violent disputes peacefully. It must catch suspects, prove their guilt, ensure that they pay restitution for damages caused, lock them away from as long as needed, and, if necessary, execute them. And likewise, it must protect the geographic area from foreign invaders. It must do all of this using the most carefully thought-out procedures, a system of law. And it must ensure that no one else tries to do it a different way. It must ensure that no one else claims jurisdiction over the same geographic area. It must prevent competing governments and vigilante groups. Now, before we go on, let's consider the concept of anarchy. This will only take a moment. Anarchy means no government, and this is the natural state of a primitive society. The idea alone is harmless, but what does it mean to act on it? It means to forcibly prevent others from creating an agency with the task of preventing men from forcing others. Now, I know that's another mind-boggling concept, so stop the tape now if you need to and give that consideration. I'm confident you'll find that it's a contradiction. A proper government must protect itself from militant anarchists. If you're going to do a thorough job creating a proper government, you need to make sure that your government can protect all the residents within the territory that it governs, and that it has sufficient physical strength, which means firepower, to overwhelm every evildoer within and without. Next question. How are you going to pay for it all? Assuming you hire policemen and judges and soldiers and purchase guns and ammunition, bombs and missiles and all the other equipment you need, how are you going to get the funding? You certainly can't steal it. You can't steal it from those you are trying to protect. You can't extort it from them. Well, regrettably, this is what goes on all the time, and it's called taxation. Now, why is taxation extortion? Because it's a protection racket. The only way to enforce a tax is with physical force. You have to threaten the people you're trying to protect with physical force to surrender their earnings. If they won't give it up willingly, you have to capture them and throw them in jail, steal their property and sell it for the money. Taxation is extortion. There's just no other way to say it.
So, a proper government can obtain funding only by voluntary contribution. You can tell the population how much it's going to cost and remind them what is likely to happen to them if their government is unable to protect them. You can pull out the history books and show them what became of other societies that couldn't or wouldn't protect themselves. There is no shortage of tragic examples.
So to repeat, a proper government can do nothing beyond the protection of rights. Just like the individual who uses excessive force defending his own rights, a government that uses force to go beyond the protection of rights will violate them. It will be crossing the line. This, absolutely, must not be permitted.
Now, having said all that, what do we have in America today? Sadly, we have perhaps the most notoriously improper government since the days of slavery. We have a government that has grown to an unbelievable size, that inflicts physical force upon us from every possible angle in some of the most unbelievable ways. If you've been following the news for the last 100 years or so, you know what I mean. It has got to the point where most people throw up their hands in exasperation. We have a government that has taxed, regulated, and subsidized nearly every major industry, that controls nearly every aspect of our lives in one way or another. We have a government which has debased our currency, printed and borrowed so much money that the economy is approaching the point of collapse. We have a government that takes a percentage from every transaction. It now threatens to take an amount for choosing not to purchase a product. This last is absolutely incredible. Every government social program involves an element of coercion. Money is taken from some men and spent in a way that supposedly will benefit others. Sometimes it does benefit them, but often it discourages them from seeking self-sufficiency and turns them into dependents. Worst of all, everyone becomes either the victim of a crime or the recipient of stolen property, or both. Does the word repugnant come to mind? We are currently witnessing the most unjust government in the history of America. What can we do about it? Keeping in mind that our current government is constantly dragging us down, we must all head for the moral high ground. This is what I have endeavored to illustrate in these first 5 videos. We must strive to be model citizens. We must lead our government by example out of the swamp that it is currently in. We must vote for only those candidates and issues that will protect rights and vote against everything else.
What I hope you got from this video is that it is reasonable, necessary, and proper to create a government that protects and never violates the rights of the individuals living within its jurisdiction. In future videos, I'll take a look at how the principle of inalienable rights applies to some of the most perplexing social situations, and revisit the structure of a proper government and functions of a proper government, and propose a path to lead us to the ideal society.